Welcome to our Friday takeover. It's a special Your Call. We've done the Conservatives, we've done UKIP, it's the Lib Dems turn this week, and Nick Clegg will be taking your questions and answering your questions, which is the most fantastic, amazing studio audience here. Listen to them applaud themselves and also show their appreciation for the Deputy Prime Minister in a respectful and perhaps even disrespectful way, some of them too. So we're going to get cracking on this. It's going to be on later on the BBC Parliament channel. We are, of course, live on 5 Live. And as well as all that, you can watch it on the 5 Live website. So let's talk about Mr Miliband's forthcoming speech today on foreign policy. Put your hand up if you might have something to say about this and the situation with migration and the situation with Libya, because that's the newsline this morning. Mr Miliband is going to say that the lack of planning after the bombing of Libya has led to this situation. Mr Cameron is, and your, by of course definition, your government is partly to blame for what has happened. Your response?
I think it's pretty distasteful, actually, to reduce this total human tragedy of hundreds of people dying out in the Mediterranean to a sort of political point-scoring blame game. Particularly, I have to say, since since we are now bringing politics into this from a party that, of course, brought us into an illegal invasion in Iraq where there was no planning at all for
He's going to say that was wrong today.
Well,
He's going to point that out. And he has distanced himself from it.
But, by the way, the Labour Party supported the intervention in Libya. This is the unusual thing about this. So, look, it's all very easy to be wise with hindsight. I so happen to think on a matter of substance, it is, of course, true, and we've learnt this over and over again in Afghanistan, in Iraq and elsewhere, is that if the outside world tries to do something through military force, in the case of Libya from the air only, there were no boots on the ground, you've also got to think of the kind of, the after effects.
Did you?
Well, I think a considerable amount of thought went in by the international community into doing so. But, of course, at the end of the day, the future of Libya is in the hands of the Libyan people. Do I think it was right or wrong for moral reasons to intervene?
If I can intervene, using that word, the future of Libya is now in the hands of so-called Islamic State, of the Al-Qaeda affiliates, of the 2 or maybe even 3 governments that are vying for power. That's the chaos we're talking about. And your colleague, David Cameron, said to the people of Benghazi, we will not desert you, we will not let you down.
No, and a huge amount of help and assistance and money has, of course, gone into trying to do our bit from outside. Look, all I'm trying to say to you is that do I think it is easy to say now that we should or shouldn't have intervened when Colonel Gaddafi said he was going to slaughter every innocent man, woman and child in Benghazi? I remain of the view that we then, with Labour support, did the right thing, not by putting boots on the ground, not repeating the mistakes of Iraq, but doing our bit with other countries to stop that humanitarian catastrophe in Benghazi. Is it legitimate to say that then things spiral in directions that you can't fully predict?
Is there a link with what's happening in the Mediterranean at the moment? Is there a link between lack of planning, post-bombing planning, with what's happening?
So let's be very clear. The majority of people, these hapless individuals who are travelling huge distances and then getting themselves into the hands of these evil human traffickers, the majority of them are Syrians and Eritreans. They're not Libyans. What's happening in Libya is because there is so much instability in Libya, the illegal human traffickers are able to use Libyan ports as their exit points. But it's just simply not true to say that the majority of the people on those boats are Libyan. So all I would plead for is a little less kind of finger pointing wisdom from Ed Miliband when he supported the intervention in the first place, and a little bit more a little more adherence to the facts about exactly who's ending up on these boats, why they are, and what we can now do about it to stop this terrible tragedy.
We've heard your response. Let's do a couple of comments on that. I think it's Dominic. Hello, Dominic. Hannah, I'll be with you in just a second. Dominic, quick one.
Hi, Nick.
Hello, Dominic.
I agree with what you're saying. I think that Labour, instead of finger pointing, should be supporting Liberals and the Conservative Party and all banding together. There's people dying, and it's a power vacuum that they sort of created in the first place by invading Iraq.
Let's take Hannah as well, right in front of you, and I know that David has a point too. Hannah, pick up on this.
Do you think that with the situation with ISIS, do you think that maybe boots on the ground is going to be the final solution?
I don't actually, Hannah.
It's the only way to beat them.
Well, is it? Is it? I'm not.
They're controlling a land the size of the United Kingdom.
Well, I have to say, Hannah, I think what we've learned from Iraq, and dare I say it from Afghanistan, is that the idea that we can march into another country and impose peace, impose a democracy, impose good governance from outside when the people of those countries
You were talking about stopping slaughter.
Well, hang on. Hannah's question was, do I believe that we can, through a military war across, by the way, many countries now in the Middle East, that we can somehow thwart ISIS in that way? I don't believe that that is the way that we can thwart ISIS. I think there are other ways which we're trying to, and which, by the way, is having some success. It's painstaking success in Iraq, less so in Syria because of the sheer chaos in Syria. But in Iraq, for instance, as you know, we're flying RAF sorties in Iraq, providing the Iraqi armed forces on the ground with support from the air. Why that's starting to work is that you've got relative political stability in Iraq. You've got armed forces who can move in on the ground, complemented by what we're doing from the air. That combination of political stability, domestic armed forces that can operate, broadly speaking, well on the ground, and intervention from the air seems to be a better recipe than us thinking that we can march into a country and sort it all out for people who want to slaughter.
We're going to take it to domestic politics in just a second. I want to take just another couple of comments. Jana.
You are saying that your current strategy is sort of working, but a little bit slowly. I think the recent events show that that's just simply not true, because thousands of people are trying to emigrate and are dying. You are then saying that boots on the ground isn't a good strategy. So how are you going to change your strategy to actually make it work better?
So I was absolutely not saying that. I was actually making a very specific point to Hannah that in Iraq, that what is happening in Iraq seems to be materially better in pushing against ISIS than it is, for instance, in Syria. What we need to do on the Mediterranean, and I think we made a first step yesterday in this EU summit, is hit these traffickers very, very hard, make sure that they can't get people onto these boats, which then, of course, sink with the tragic human consequences. So close down their business, use the considerable aid and assistance that we provide to countries in the region to help people stay put in their community rather than take their life into their own hands and move across such large distances, and work more coherently as a European Union. We have, frankly, allowed Italy to try and deal with this on their own for too long. That makes no sense. That is the kind of, how can I put it? Look, the complexities of the world. We live in a very dangerous world, a very unstable world. There are never, in my experience, single military magic wand solutions to any of these conflicts, because a lot of them have deep economic and political and social roots. If we can move on all of those different fronts at the same time in a coordinated way, we might make a difference.
Let's move away, just if we can, from the danger and the chaos of that situation and the appalling and frightening danger of so-called IS. I think we'll keep it on migration, though, in a general sense. Frank, where are you, Frank? I think you've got a question on that, UKIP and immigration.
Yes, Nick, does your party have any concerns about the current levels of net migration? And at what point would the numbers have to reach before you would start to take action to control them? Mainly because the resources in this country, NHS, schools, we're at full stretch already.
Any other comments on this? Hands up and we'll come to you. OK, Nick Clegg.
So Frank, I'll tell you why I've always been much more reluctant to sort of pluck a magic number out of sort of thin air, is because it's where, of course, David Cameron made such a huge mistake. I told him this personally. He said, I'm going to make this great vow that, we're going to bring net migration down to whatever it was, tens of thousands. A vow, of course, he subsequently broke spectacularly. I said, don't do that.
We'll come on to breaking vows spectacularly later on.
Sure. No, well, yeah, hang on, by the way, and where I've not been able to deliver on my commitments, I've put my hands up, said sorry, musically no less. I haven't heard that from David Cameron yet. But anyway, I'm not going to sing. I'm not going to sing for you, Frank.
Frank's question, right.
Yeah, what I was going to say was why I'm reluctant to sort of pretend there's some magic number is because, for instance, on the net migration figure, which has been the preoccupation for many people, you could have 1 million people come into our country, 1 million Brits leave, and hey presto, you've reached your target. It doesn't necessarily make it better for our country. I basically make a different distinction, not a numerical one. I make a distinction between bad immigration and good immigration. And what I mean by bad immigration, which should be stopped, is illegal immigration, is employers bringing in people into our country and employing them in shocking circumstances which undercut domestic workers. I mean the fact that we have huge numbers of people who come here legitimately on visas and then stay way beyond the point at which their visa has expired. That is what you need to bear down on. And I'll give you some examples of how you can do that. I, for instance, announced a significant increase in the fines imposed on employers, unscrupulous employers who take on people in the circumstances I've described. It was my personal insistence that we now have, my personal insistence when we formed the government, that we reintroduce new border controls which were removed by previous governments. So, for instance, Frank, if you were to leave the Kent ports tomorrow on holiday, you're going to have your passport checked as you go out as well as you go in. Why? But hang on, it's a very important point for frankness, so that you can establish exactly who is entitled to remain in the country.
But the problem, it's the good migration that's the problem.
What do you mean by that, Frank? Let's get some other comments in a second on this, then we'll throw it back.
At the moment, we're up to 300,000 people, and I suspect the majority of those people are legitimate. And the problem is, have we got the resources? How can you plan your NHS
What do you
budget?
think? Do you think we have the resources? Do you think it is having a real strain on our public services?
Absolutely. Well, throughout this campaign, we've talked about the housing crisis, the lack of school places,
Frank,
the problem in the NHS.
If we pull the drawbridge up, and I'm not saying you're...
I'm not saying pull the drawbridge.
No, but just for sake of argument, if we were to say, right, immigrants off, or sort of put up the sort of no thanks sign at the cliffs of Dover.
Well, Nigel Farage isn't saying that.
No. Well, actually, I personally think if you did what Nigel Farage recommended, our NHS, our social care system, would pretty well collapse overnight because it relies so heavily on nurses and doctors and social care workers from other parts of the country helping us out.
Yeah, with regard to the immigration side, if you look at the side of the fact that there's a lot of migrant workers working on soft fruit farming, and they're being paid maybe minimum wage and that sort of level, but a lot of our British people won't work in those kind of industries and that kind of sector simply because it is minimum wage.
Insaf, you're nodding as well.
Yeah,
so
I think that we need immigration, and with the growth of parties like UKIP, I mean, I came to the UK when I was 9 years old, and I'm starting to feel from Saudi Arabia, and I'm starting to feel alienated. My parents work as doctors.
Why did they come here?
I guess just for a better standard of living. I mean, Saudi Arabia is a very strict Muslim country, so I'm starting to feel very alienated with the growth of parties like UKIP.
Are you? In what way does that manifest itself? Do you feel, in what way are you feeling alienated? Do you feel there's a bit of finger pointing, of hostility towards you?
Definitely.
How does that happen?
Even sort of close friends of mine are starting to see even what I see as positive migration as negative. So I want to know what you would do for people like me.
Well, I mean, you've said it in a nutshell. We need to be an open-hearted, generous-spirited country, which we are. We need to be open for business, but not open to abuse. And that's the distinction that most fair-minded people understand. The rules should be adhered to. We shouldn't have people coming in illegally. We shouldn't have employers employing people in a way which undercuts domestic workers against the rules. We shouldn't have people coming here on their visas and then staying beyond the point at which they should no longer be here. Or, I think that's what people want. They want competence in the way in which the rules are administered. They don't want us to sort of shut up shop and say that your parents as doctors who are helping patients in the NHS are somehow not welcome. And that's the distinction I would draw, Frank, back to your original question, more than imagining that there is a specific number, which if you exceed the specific number, it's all wrong, and if you don't, somehow it's all okay. I don't believe that's the case.
Let's move on to specific numbers. Let me see now. We have got some news just coming in. Banking giant HSBC is to carry out a review into whether to keep its headquarters in the UK. We just heard that. We'll have more on that later on. Now, we have...
That's big news.
Sorry?
That's big news.
Yeah. Implications?
But I just don't know the reasons. I don't know what the reasons would be. But if the reasons, I mean, obviously, this is very difficult for me because I've only just heard this, and so therefore I'm not going to pretend this is the reasons without knowing so. But I am increasingly concerned in this election campaign. It slightly relates to what Insaf said, is that as the debate becomes more polarised, and as the sort of threat of, Miliband in Salmon's pockets, Cameron in Farage's pocket becomes ever more real to people, I do think it's having a really unsettling effect on kind of business confidence and the confidence in the economy. And that's what I think. Of course I would say this. I think it's so important we stay in the kind of moderate, sensible centre.
Whose pocket will you be in?
My own, thank you very much.
Let's talk about domestic
Miriam,
politics.
sometimes.
Let's talk about domestic politics, if we may. Does anyone have a general question about the way the Liberal Democrats have come across, have acquitted themselves in the last 5 years? David. Oh, lots of questions coming. T'other David. We've got a plethora of Davids. It's just like the old Lib Dem coalition, the two Davids. Go on, David.
So you've said on numerous occasions that you've been very proud of your record in government. I'm wondering then why you feel the electorate has treated you so unfairly, and if we could have an answer that doesn't involve the line, we knew we'd have to make tough choices coming into Parliament.
Oh, well, we're going to remember that. We'll get another question as well.
Let's
take James. James, yeah.
Sir, In the last 5 years, you have broken promises regarding student tuition fees. Yes,